Welcome to Nerds at Church, a queer feminist podcast diving deep into faith, nerdery, and the Bible. I'm Pastor Kay, and I use pronouns like she and her.
And I'm Pastor Emily, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
And I'm Jeremy Cobb, and my pronouns are he, him.
In this episode, we'll discuss space travel in pop culture.
Yay!
We have 2 content notifications for this episode. We talk about the rise of Nazis and child dismemberment and danger when discussing the deep dive.
Check out the episode description for links to any references we make in this episode.
So, for our deep dive into space travel in pop culture, we are super excited to have special guest Jeremy Cobb of Three Black Halfling. Jeremy is an actor, writer, and podcast host whom you may know as the co-host and resident GM of the show Three Black Halflings. In addition to Three Black Halflings, Jeremy has appeared on Not Another D&D Podcast, Dicebreaker, Transplaner, and many more. He also has a streaming channel, twitch.tv/casualquestlive, in which he plays classic games for the first time, guided by his best friend, Tay. You can find him on Twitter and Blue Sky at JeremyCobb1 and on Instagram at TheCobbmeister. I have no good transition to this. The constant joke, and we even have like merch in our merch store on this, is I am too NB to transition. So I'm just going to do that as my transition. So we talked a bit in our episode with Dr. Katie Mack about space travel in fiction and the reality that it has to make stuff up. So since it isn't supposed to depict factual space travel, and particularly since it involves traveling at the speed of light or faster, that's just not a possibility currently in our understanding. And so you have to make stuff up. So I am curious why you like or dislike or engage with space travel in fiction. Like, what do you think the point of it is?
I think in most of the fiction that I've engaged with that involves space travel, it's typically used primarily as just a means of getting from one cool place to another cool place. So something like Star Wars, there are like sections of Star Wars that take place primarily in space, but it feels more like a road trip a lot of times rather than like this is the meat of the movie, except I guess in like The Last Jedi, because there is a whole section where they're just on the ship. But I don't know, for me, what I like about it, I like that it can connect you to new and interesting places. Like you are literally traveling to another world, and it's different from, say, teleportation. It's almost like in Star Trek, Star Trek is a voyage. I mean, they're astronauts. You're sailing through the stars. You're a star voyager. So I think the idea of it being like a nautical piece of media, like you have this time on the ship where it's like, we're all getting cabin fever. Yeah. And then the cool islands that you get to and exciting new worlds and species and cultures and everything that you get to meet. I think that's also very cool.
It is fascinating how ocean-like, and when we think about ships, they're not planes. Yeah. And so the reverse is true, that like the ocean is if there is any alien life form, it probably exists in the ocean because it is so unexplored and so diverse. Like, I don't know.
Thank you, Pacific Rim.
Did octopi really come about on Earth, or did they like plop in? Who knows? But so there's the travel in space is like travel in the sea, but also space is kind of like the ocean of this not nearly enough explored area. And, you know, as we learned, super deadly if you try to navigate it with a Nintendo controller.
Yeah, and also the fact that you can move in any direction. I think that's another omnidirectional travel, underwater versus in space. I think that's another parallel. I completely agree. And the fact that like most of where you're going, there isn't anything. Like, sure, there's water and tiny microbes in the ocean, but mostly you're not going to be seeing like big animals all the time unless you go to specific spots. You can go probably for miles without seeing anything of note. Just like in space, most of it's empty space.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And a lot of dark matter, but that's a whole other. Yeah. Again, Dr. Katie Mack blew my mind. Yeah. So when we talk about space travel, then there's different ways that we talk about traveling in space in like science fiction and fantasy and stuff. And there's the breaking light speed version, which is like Star Trek, Star Wars, those sorts of shows. Is this a cheap cop-out so that you can move things along at the speed of plot? Or is there like, I guess, is it a cheap cop-out, 1? 2, have you seen ways where we're actually taking into account a price that might be paid for traveling at the speed of light?
I don't know that I'd call it a cheap cop-out in answer to question 1, because it's like, I don't know, do you want the story to happen? Like, It's a bit like when Alfred Hitchcock was asked, why don't your characters call the police? He says, so the movie can happen. Like, at some point, we got to suspend a little bit of disbelief. Yeah, it's not exactly it's not all real. So we got to, mess with it a little bit. And I have seen versions of, you could argue that like hypersleep is a form of faster than light travel, so to speak, because it just preserves you, or anything that is hypersleep like, because it preserves you through that journey. So you just go to sleep and then, as from your perspective, moments later awaken in a new place. And of course the implications of that are like, what if somebody's container gets messed up and they die, or you can't go to sleep in there, so you're just stuck up for that whole time. Like Prometheus, of course, David is up at the beginning of Prometheus. He doesn't go to hypersleep. The movie Rocket Man, I think there's like a whole section of the movie where he can't go to sleep while they're going to Mars. So he's like just awake on the ship for months by himself. Yeah.
I did not see it, but I read a lot of the columns about that movie Passengers with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence.
That's what that whole movie is
I was trying to remember what that was called. And I think Passengers does a great job of it, because if we are assuming that you can sleep the whole time and be preserved and whatever, that okay. But then when they are brought out of sleep, and when it is like they're brought out of sleep and something happens, right? So they have to take care of something. But then that space where they're like, okay, do we go back to sleep, or do we just live our lives? And then we fast forward and see the tree that's huge and growing. And I thought that was like one of the well done things, because it is travel with light-ish stuff, but not without, not without a cost.
Interstellar's another one to look at that deals with and actually there's a song by the band Queen, because Queen's guitar player Brian May has a doctorate in astrophysicist. The song 39 from their album Night at the Opera, which is the same album that has Bohemian Rhapsody on it, is a song about traveling through space. And at the end of the song, due to time dilation, the narrator arrives back to see that his own daughter is now an adult. And the last line of the song is, your mother's eyes from your eyes cry to me. It's a good song. But that's what that's about, like the impact of time dilation in the faster than light. Well, I guess I think it's faster than light travel in that. Another one that I wanted to shout out was Animorphs. I don't know if y'all ever read Animorphs.
I have heard a lot about them, but I have been instructed that I should not read them because there are tropes in there that will scar me for life. But from what I understand, the whole book series was kind of in favor of scarring people for life. That was sort of not quite the point, but the authors really wanted to make it clear that kids can handle this stuff.
Yeah, I won't go into detail, but I've been doing a series on our Patreon, on the Three Black Halflings Patreon, just going through talking about the different elements of the series recently, and it is wildly dark. But in that series, they have a thing called Z-Space, which it's sort of a separate dimension that you can travel through that seems to drastically shorten the amount of time it takes to travel between two places. So it's not exactly light speed, but it's almost like a wormhole situation where you travel into another dimension and still have to travel, but then you arrive at your destination sooner. And one small complication to that is the morphing powers that the kids get, which are essentially alien technology that the kids have access to. When you morph an animal, all of your human organs go to Z-Space. They just sit in Z-Space and are just floating in there. And I guess theoretically a ship could hit you. And you could just die while you were in morph. Yeah. So theoretically, you undergo interdimensional spatial travel every single time you morph. And actually, one other side effect of that is if you stay in morph for longer than 2 hours, you are stuck forever and can never get the morphing power again. You're just stuck as that animal.
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, you gotta have some drawbacks, right?
The time dilation thing, I think the Alien movies did that, and Pitch Black, the first Riddick movie. And speaking of classic games, there was this wacky little video game at least 20 years ago, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, that was set in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy universe, that the game was set on the spaceship Titanic. That is a throwaway joke that Douglas Adams makes in the books. And you are like the only awake passenger on the ship and have to solve a series of problems in order to go back to sleep. I had completely forgotten about that, but it was a very trippy experience.
Whoa.
Nice. That's fascinating. Yeah. Our house is working on getting everybody Elite Dangerous, the computer game, to play. I'm just excited because then I'm going to get a joystick, and then I get to have a joystick and a mouse and do the things.
That's really cool. I haven't played a game with a joystick in, since I went to an arcade last, which was decades ago.
Yeah.
I know. I'm so excited, like ridiculously excited. We were talking about what we wanted to be able to play, whether it's like 2 mice or whatever, because you have to, again, you're traveling in all of the directions. And so you have to have more than just back and forth, forward, back. And I was like, I want a joystick. I want a joystick.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's space travel where you can't break light speed, but you can use wormholes. And this reminded me of Contact, both the book and movie. I recently lost a weekend to John Scalzi's Emperox trilogy, which was fantastic. And the TV show Stargate also started out this way, although, of course, later they get their magic ships that I don't actually remember how they work. But the focus on wormholes gives you some limits to the storytelling. And is this more realistic storytelling? Like, these are the natural roadways of the universe, or does it just get in the way of the story by having all these extra limits on it?
I think the best way to answer that is on a case-by-case basis, because it really depends on how it's employed in the story. It doesn't inherently, I think in some cases it's just a cool, I would say it is probably more realistic, because as far as I'm aware, there doesn't seem to be a means, rather, to travel faster than light in our current situation. We don't know how that would work.
Yeah.
But like I've heard wormholes offered as possible means of traveling faster than light. So in that sense, I do think it's probably more realistic. The one example that comes to mind is actually Kingdom Hearts. I did also play Kingdom Hearts 2. I didn't really play much of 1, but Kingdom Hearts 2, in that one, and I think in Kingdom Hearts 1, there's these gummy ship levels. Like in Kingdom Hearts, you're traveling from world to world, and each world is a different Disney movie, essentially. And you're traveling with Donald and Goofy on what's called a gummy ship. And I think that there are like little gates that you can go through. And while you're going around traveling, there are like these gummy ship levels where you just are flying around in a ship trying to dodge obstacles and shoot stuff. And they completely slow the game down. And I feel like no one actually likes those levels. But because you're there to like team up with like Mickey Mouse and like classic Disney characters and Hercules and go through the plot of the movie Hercules, or you turn into a lion cub and you help Simba out in Pride Rock. Or
that actually sounds like the funnest game ever.
Yeah, you should check out. I highly recommend Kingdom Hearts. I would say if you're going to play it, you should play Kingdom Hearts 1 first, because if you play Kingdom Hearts 2 first, not only will you be very confused as to what's happening, but also the gameplay is so much faster and more energetic. It's difficult to go back to playing 1 because like, oh my lord, this is so slow.
It's a little bit like Doctor Who. Like, Classic Who, I'm doing an alternating rewatch right now, and Classic Who is, like, so slow sometimes. And then I, like, get one episode of the contemporary seasons. But, yeah.
Yeah.
I really like how wormholes work in Interstellar. Because, they explain how theoretically a wormhole works, right? They do the like, you fold the space and time and blah, blah, blah. And there's a weirdness about, like, they show that something's weird and that we then later find out it's like when he's coming back through the wormhole and the two characters have like this moment of contact to like whatever. But because it does a wormhole, so it allows for the travel, but also it's a scary thing and they don't know if it'll work. And there's like a limit to transmission back and forth. So it shows some of the limits. And then a lot of the like time stuff is because they're orbiting black holes and that sort of stuff. And it does all those other things. But yeah, I really like the way Interstellar does that.
And that great, I think for me, my one is the best scene in the movie when Matthew McConaughey sees all the images, like all the letters from his family. That scene of him just, because it's like, oh, a bunch more time has passed for them than it has for you. And that scene's,
gut-wrenching.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't mention 2 other instances of either wormholes or time being folded. You just reminded me, Emily. So the first one is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
And the movie that they made semi-recently is just fantastic.
I haven't seen it.
I love it. But yeah, A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Is a whole other,
I don't think they explain the mechanics of how they do it. It's sort of like magic, like science that is so powerful that it essentially functions like magic, maybe. But they basically, it's literally, they fold space-time and then you just move to a new spot. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
I think what essentially they did was they just said Mrs. Whatsit is powerful enough that she gets to do whatever she wants. And I do kind of appreciate that style of storytelling too. Just don't worry about it. It's Mrs. What's-It, go with it.
It's good.
I completely agree. I actually miss that. Playing stuff like D&D or other games that have like very clearly defined magic systems, while it is cool, it also feels like it places limitations, and you lose like limitations on like the wondrous aspect of it. It makes it a bit more mundane in some cases. And I really like the idea that, well, yeah, this person's just powerful enough. Look, we can't really explain it. They just do it.
It's just that.
Yeah. The other one I wanted to mention was 2001: A Space Odyssey with the famous Stargate sequence. Like a good 5 minutes of that movie are just traveling through some weird wormhole portal and seeing bizarre images of landscapes and flashing colors and stuff. Yeah, I think that was a very effective use of a wormhole, and probably based on the science that they had then, about as accurate as they could have made it.
Yeah.
Like circa 1967 or 1968.
Yeah. Sure. And we talked to Katie Mack about this a little bit, but I think it's been interesting to notice the ways that science fiction has become more scientific, right? And it's partly like this, they're just the most powerful because we didn't know and we didn't have rules. And so we just like suspend our disbelief. But now like Interstellar had like science consultants to like make sure that the science that they were relying on and the science that we do know is not being broken. And it's just the beyond what we know part that is fictionalized, which Kay and I talk about it a lot, of like representation of clergy and religion and particularly Christianity in pop culture is just
so terrible.
Yeah.
They have not yet learned that actually hiring somebody to be a consultant would be really, really helpful. But it's interesting to see that development away from, we don't really know anything about science, so we're just making all of the things up, and having explanations that don't have to be testable or like very close to like current theories and models, and to now we have quantum physics and all of this other stuff that if you don't take it into account, then people will be like, well, you just made up the science and it's all fake.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that people try to add some scientific realism into things. I think not everything needs it. Like, I don't think Star Wars needs it, for example. I think it depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. If part of the story is the actual science, then I think it's great to have it in there. But if you're basically, like in Star Wars, telling kind of a fantasy story in space, then yeah, we don't need to know how the lightsabers work. I mean, I know that like the expanded materials explain how lightsabers work, and it's the kyber crystals and this, that, and the other. But like, who cares? When you see Luke Skywalker turn on a laser sword, you're not thinking like, wow, that's so cool, he's focusing the power of the crystal. No, you're thinking like, whoa, that guy has a glowing laser sword. It's not. Yeah, it doesn't matter to the actual movie. And the same thing with like warp speed. We don't have to sit there and be like, so please, Han, before we progress with the plot, could you please explain to me exactly how light speed works? Like, nah. So I think it really depends on how realistic the movie is trying to be. So in Interstellar's case, I think it works for the movie's benefit to try and be very realistic, because that's what a lot of the movie's about. But if you're doing like, I'm trying to think of another, Arrival doesn't need to. Arrival can play with like the mechanics of time, but you don't need to explain how they're able to do this. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. I love The Story of Us is the book that it's based off of. And it's a short story, but I love the way it is written, because the writing also like it gets at this like, we don't know, and this is how it like timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff.
Yeah. I think there's an element of wonder that can be lost when you explain everything a lot. And I don't think it's, again, Interstellar, still pretty awesome and wondrous, but I think there's a wondrous quality to Arrival where we just don't know. It's a mystery. And it's the mystery of how it all works is part of the point of the movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of realism, I just thought of this right before we started recording, but there is also the option of just acknowledging that space travel should be ridiculous to us at this stage in our scientific development. And so you've got like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you have the improbability drive, which allows you to travel through space by calculating the exact improbability that you will immediately teleport to this other point in space. And then as soon as you've calculated that, boom, you go there. So are there other universes where they just let space travel be silly? Like, I couldn't come up with any other options off the top of my head. I imagine the pigs in space from the Muppets might kind of count for that, but
probably.
Yeah, I never read Discworld. I think
Kay has.
Yes.
The Hitchhiker's Guide reference is great. I completely agree. What's the space travel like in Discworld?
They don't really travel through space. I would doubt that they would get to that level of technology. To be honest, I'm only halfway through the series because, there's only so many of them and there aren't going to be any more, and so I'm trying to treasure each one. And there's like 40 of them. And so I don't know, but I don't think they do. But yeah, if Terry Pratchett ever wrote space travel, that would be fantastic. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here looking at my bookshelves trying to find.
Sure.
I was like, what do I have in my books? I don't have any.
Yeah. Okay, so I've read the books of Hitchhiker's Guide. I've seen the miniseries from the 80s, and then also the more recent movie with Martin Freeman, which was okay, kind of got the spirit of it, didn't quite nail it for me, but I did enjoy the bit where they allowed the improbability drive to be silly, and so like at one point they all turn into yarn-made characters. Instead of being human. And then they finally slowly get their way back. That part was fun. But yeah, I appreciate just saying, you know what? We don't know how this works. Let's just let it be ridiculous. That seems reasonable.
Okay, hear me out. Now that we've figured out that space-time is the thing, and not just space and time, everything everywhere all at once. Right? So it jumps into the multiverse. And a multiverse understanding of things. And for Horror Nerds at Church, when it first came out, we did an episode on Everything Everywhere All at Once. And it was fantastic. But that does do the ridiculousness, right? Because you're jumping into other universes and they're jumping into you. And like, you have hot dog fingers and googly eyes and rocks and like all sorts of different dynamics that I think it was a fascinating movie to watch, period. And then also when you think about the ridiculous worlds that they jump into in different places. And even Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness gets at that too, right?
Yeah.
I think like it's a different kind of space travel, time travel type of situation, but I think it also is an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and Into the Spider-Verse also has that as well. And leans more into the absurd side of it, I think, than Doctor Strange does.
Yeah. Doctor Strange has like aspects of it, and Into the Spider-Verse is just like fantastic.
Yeah.
Marvel has a history of letting things be ridiculous. I've read through a great chunk of the classic Deadpool comics, and if you want ridiculous, Deadpool does that. So they're very good at it.
That's true.
Yeah, I think if you have a character named Howard the Duck, I feel like you can't claim you're an entirely serious company.
It is true. It is true. And that kind of jumps into the other... These were all the categories that Kay and I could, like, think of. So there may be other categories out there. But the, like, Doctor Who version of space travel that you don't explain it, right? Which is, like, Mrs. What's-It is just so powerful that she can do this thing. And so Doctor Who, the, like, reversing the polarity of the neutron flow, not actually a thing. But, which I love Doctor Who, so I have, like, my own personal bias about, like, how much it encourages me to wonder and explore and want to know more. But does that encourage us to give up on real science? Does that detract from our, like, I don't know.
Also, this just had to be a question.
Yeah, because Doctor Who.
Of course.
But, like, after this episode, we're recording our 4th episode, so jumping back in time to talk about the solar system. And one of the things that we did was we put out a poll about Pluto to see what people thought. And there is this, are we letting our nostalgia override actual science? And is that part of the bigger problem that we're facing in the world today of, like, people don't care about science and are not getting vaccines anymore and are not wearing masks? And, like, is this part of the problem or is this not part of the problem because it doesn't, I don't know.
I think it's a really, really interesting question. So there is a YouTuber whose videos I've enjoyed for a few years now named Kyle Colgren. I think his most famous series is Brows Held High, although I don't know if he still makes that. He used to be with Channel Awesome back in the day. So way back, like 10 years ago plus. But he did a video about... similar to what you're saying, the way that popular culture can reflect aspects of the society that it's in. And I think he argues that popular culture, as much as it shapes, it also reflects. And he was talking specifically about the Frankfurt School. That's what they were called. They were the Frankfurt School, a group of German academics who at one point were trying to figure out, how did Germany fall to Nazism? Like, how did that happen? These were guys who lived through Weimar Germany and saw all of this. And they were like, hey, let's say that the popular culture of the time is actually important in looking at this. Because the people who turned into Nazis, well, some of them were in these movies and helped make these movies. Let's look at what these movies were about. And so they were looking at like 1920s, 1930s German film and looking at how over time you can see the idea of this tyrant lurking in the shadows, mysterious, who's going to undo society and has like an evil element there, and we have to stop them by any means necessary. And at one point he's talking about, I think one of the ones he mentions is M, the movie M by Fritz Lang. And in that movie, there is, I think, a murder of children is the villain. And the townspeople are so desperate to have this guy taken out that they turn to the mob. And they actually turn to criminals and say, help us. We have to destroy this secret evil amongst us. And the mob ends up like putting out a hit on this guy to try and identify him. They mark him with an M on his jacket. And it's like, whoa.
Like Scarlet Letter flashbacks.
Yeah, and indeed the Star of David as well. Like if you look at the way that the Nazis then, the way they talked about the Jewish people and the way that they went after the Jewish people, the parallels start to become clear. Now, Fritz Lang...
I was going to say, I would be curious to do an analysis of how the villains and stuff in that are portrayed, and if there are, like, Semitic characteristics that start to come in, too. Maybe not, but, like...
You could see it. No, I would say... What's the name of it? It's one of the very first movies with a twist ending. It's a really good... The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I'd have to look at a picture of Dr. Caligari, but I think you could see it, maybe. What's really interesting about it is the people who were making these movies, by and large, were not fascists. Some of the actors were, but a lot of the people actually, like the directors, Fritz Lang was not a fascist. I think he actually left Germany when Hitler and the Nazis came to power. He fled Germany and I think ended up directing stuff in the United States. But a lot of these directors like fled. Some of the actors stayed. I think... And actually, coincidentally, I think the actor who played the somnambulist in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari also may have played the character who was the inspiration for the Joker. Yeah, Conrad Veidt. Conrad Veidt played, I think he played Cesare, the somnambulist, and he also starred in the lead role of The Man Who Laughs, which was the inspiration for the Joker originally. But like at the end of the video, Kyle talks about how you could look at the rise of Donald Trump and see that reflected in the media that led up to his coming into power, and how like you start to see, for example, the way in the Hunger Games, the rich are depicted as like these people with strangely colored hair and who are very flamboyant and are out of touch with the lives of the common people, and how they're the real threats, and how we need to find a billionaire businessman who can come in and save the day, like in Iron Man. And the Avengers. Yeah, these guys, they may not be perfect. And you look at all the male anti-hero movies that were coming out throughout the 2000s, especially early 2010s, with Tony Soprano. Sopranos ended in like, I think 2007 or 8. And then Breaking Bad and Mad Men. And then Frank Underwood in what's it called? The first Netflix show that came out that I can't even remember. But it was like the first Netflix drama. But there's like a lot of male anti-heroes. If you look at all of those and how our culture started to idolize that, the question becomes, did we respond to that positively because of the movies themselves? Or were the movies simply reflecting a tendency that had already developed within the culture?
Which is fascinating. Like, definitely Avengers and comics for me is like, absolutely. Batman is only a superhero because he's rich and
Batman's
hasn't
Justice
gone to
League,
therapy. Right? But like the comic genre, particularly the like older comic genre that is mostly men, right? But then like Hunger Games, I love the Hunger Games, not as much as I love other stuff because it messes with my head. But I don't think about Hunger Games in that same view. And so as you were describing it, I was like, oh, and Hunger Games was misinterpreted by like every company ever, right? Like Subway partnering up with Hunger Games.
Yeah, that was weird.
Makeup companies partnering up with Hunger Games. There's a book, The Girl Who Was on Fire, that has a whole bunch of young adult authors who each take a different aspect of Hunger Games and write just like a short chapter essay on it that's fantastic, because it goes into that of like, how is the realistic, like, what are they called? The like competition-y shows.
The game shows?
Not
reality
even game
television?
shows, but like the real, like Survivor. Reality television. Like, how does that lend itself to looking at the Hunger Games as like, this is a possible future for us? Like, how does that lend itself to what becomes the Hunger Games? It's just fascinating. Yeah.
And also got us as a culture so much more used to the concept of child murder as entertainment, which, like, there was a moment a few seasons ago on our show where Emily brought up, I think it was a book that had child dismemberment as a plot point, and just, that's how I reacted to. I was rather startled by it, but it was a young adult dystopia, and I don't remember what it was called, but...
Yep. It was the Unwind series.
Sure. I reacted with this visceral horror to it, and then we both realized, the reason why Emily didn't think it was weird to bring that up was because the Hunger Games were such a thing. And so the concept of murdering children was not completely out of the ballpark. And then I managed to convince Emily that, yes, we should put in a content warning for that one. But...
It's true.
Yeah. What has the Hunger Games done to us?
Part of it is that, like, I just really like young adult dystopias.
Sure.
And so, like, young adult dystopias, the kids are always in danger.
Yeah.
Like, that's
fair.
An underlying thing. But I had not thought of it as child dismemberment.
It didn't register that way.
Until Kate was like, what?
Yeah. Animorphs, speaking of Animorphs, has similar... I think Animorphs falls into more the Gundam category, where a lot of it is anti this. Like, the point of it, even though the cool part of the book, quote unquote, is a bunch of kids turning into animals to fight aliens, at the same time, Animorphs, like, deliberately depicts things in a horrific way. I would argue to try and say that, like, hey, putting these children in the position of fighting a war against alien invaders is in fact bad for the kids. It's very, very bad for the kids. And spoiler alert, for the kids who survive at the end of the series, they're all just real sad. None of them are happy people. None of them are well-adjusted. They're like, our youth was horrible, and now we're like trying to find our way as young adults, and we genuinely don't know what to do with ourselves anymore.
Yeah. We talked about this, I think, in Horror Nerds at Church, maybe, which is the other podcast that I co-host, in case that was not clear. But we talked about that with Saba Tahir's Ember in the Ashes series has child soldiers. Star Wars has child soldiers.
Yeah, with the Jedi.
We don't think about Star Wars as having child soldiers in the same way that it is depicted. And the Ember in the Ashes series, partly, like, Saba Tahir talks about her own cultural history and lived experiences of, like, child soldiers are a real thing. They're a real thing today. They happen in many parts of the world, and they are horrific. And so Ember in the Ashes gets at the horrifying aspects of it within that fantasy culture and universe. Whereas Star Wars is just like, we literally take kids when they're like
babies,
a year old, and then they never see their family again, and we expect them to be like well-rounded, well-developed little children, and it's horrible. The ones who like go bad are the ones who are like Anakin, who doesn't come to us until he's like 5 or 6, and that's why he went. Like, it's just like, this is child soldiers, but we never talk about it that way.
And also they're forced to be celibate. Like, they're not allowed to get married. They have to be celibate.
Right. Which, like, we've been there with the Catholic Church. We know that's a bad idea. Like, it does not go well.
Yeah. The Jedi Order, if you were to actually try and do, like, a really, really realistic version of, like, a Jedi Order in Star Wars, they would be so much worse than they are depicted in, like, if you did, like, a Watchmen Star Wars, the Jedi would just be horrible people.
That fan fiction exists.
I mean, that's true. We're doing a Star Wars Alien series for Horror Nerds at Church right now, and we talk about the Jedi as, like, are they police or clergy? Either way, I have concerns.
Yeah. They do call it a religion so, I guess they're kind of religious. They're like the Knights Templar.
Yeah. Legally speaking, you can claim Jedi as your religion in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
Are there any provisions within the law for that?
I don't know exactly how it works, but I was online acquaintances with someone who knew someone who was going into the military, and you had to list your religion so that they could do correct things for you. And they listed Jedi, and the military eventually had to take them seriously about it. I have no idea how, like, sincere this was, but it turns out that it's, as I've had other conversations with like pagans, it's really hard to have the conversation of it doesn't count as a real religion because religions are so different. And so what legally counts as a religion in the United States is actually pretty open now, but they had to have a lot of conversations about it to get there.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think one thing that in the conversation of child soldiers, as well as something you brought up earlier, Emily, which is the depictions of faith in fiction and how there's two things actually I wanted to say about that, because I want to talk about that too. Like that's a very interesting topic to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if either of you watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, the anime series.
No.
I had friends in college who wanted me to.
Okay, yeah. It is a kids in mechs sort of series where these children are drafted by this shadowy military force to go fight these monsters called angels that show up, these weird, beautiful, yet horrifying monsters that appear that are, dozens and dozens of stories tall. And they get into these giant mech suits called Evas. And it's like the kids have to train for it and they can feel everything the mech feels. So if the mech gets damaged, they feel pain. The show has a lot of themes about, again, how putting kids in war situations is bad, but also has a lot of sort of vaguely religious themes. It's a complaint I've had about it as somebody who comes from a Christian background, because the creators basically have openly said, we didn't really try to incorporate the themes in any sort of, I would argue, like, intelligent quote unquote way. Like, it's an interesting series. I'm not saying the series is bad. I think its handling of the religious themes is poor, because it basically is like, oh yeah, they're called angels and there's somebody called Adam and the spear of Longinus and this, that, and the like, but it's like all sort of slapped together and not done in a way that to me feels like we understood what we were referencing on a deep enough level to leverage this information that would bring greater depth to the story. It's just like, yeah, I don't know, guys. This feels kind of weird that we stuck all this in there.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like Iron Widow. I don't know if you've read, only one book is out so far, but Iron Widow is rooted in, I think, Chinese culture. And so it taps more into like the yin and the yang. But it's like mechs and fighting and like that aspect of it. And like, I am Christian, so like there's a limit to my understanding, but I have degrees in theology. So I've done some learning, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how Iron Widow actually like digs into the religion and just the philosophy and stuff around, I think, especially Buddhism, to have this actually work. That's not just like angel, Adam, throw the names of the things, but like actually has a way of thinking about it that's like really helpful. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
It's a really cool book. Yeah, I really like it. And I'm excited for the second. I don't know when the second book is coming out, but.
So, personally speaking, I grew up reading a fair amount of like Golden and Silver Age science fiction. And so what about older science fiction tropes? Like, for example, generation ships, which actually Red Dwarf did this, but it was technically an accident. Or stories that actually do the velocity math at you, like several of Robert Heinlein's earlier stories, and also a bunch of Asimov does. Do you see any of those older tropes? Notice I'm not including the hugely misogynistic or racist ones. Any of those older tropes coming back?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I have not engaged as much with classic sci-fi beyond I once won I was in a science fiction club in college, and I won a volume of H.G. Wells stories.
Ooh.
So I read through that, and one of them involved, I think, going to the moon with, I think it was like an element that they discovered that allowed you to float called cavorite, I think. That was in that story. And it's like they meet people on the moon. What I think of when I think of like classic science fiction is there was always a big sense of like mystery. And they didn't like, they might spend some time trying to engage with like, oh, how exactly did we do this? But it's always like, we're going to discover something new. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it just causes complications. But I think that's the big theme of those kinds of stories. And I feel like right now we're very cynical. I think societally we've gotten real cynical with stuff. So I hope we can get back to the exciting, like, let's go discover. Instead of like, it's out there and it's bad and it wants to kill us.
Which, come to think of it, was also the theme of the very last Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, now that I think about it.
Yeah, let's go exploring.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, okay, when you were listing the options, I was like, well, Foundation, right?
I do need to watch that. I've read the books.
I just finished watching the second season of it, and it definitely is coming back, right? Because it's a popular show on Apple, whatever's. And it's like math and science cannot solve the fall of this empire, because empires pretty much always need to fall, but it can help us recover from it. And that dynamic, which is also, I think, part of Interstellar, right? Like that the math and science of how do we get off of Earth because Earth is no longer habitable because we have damaged it so much, kind of does that as well, which I think is interesting. And it goes with the cynical stuff, right? Like there is a cynicism in the way things are is not survivable or savable, which like climate activists and like climate change, right? Like, there's a sense in which like that I think is dooming us. I want the radical sci-fi that says we figured out a way to actually restore the Earth. We figured out a way to actually reverse that, because when it's just like we can't, and there are things that we can't stop, and I get that, and it's important to acknowledge that, but like, when there are things that like we can't stop, how do we then get the inspiration to walk it back, to repair the damage we've done to the climate?
Yeah. Like WALL-E.
Yeah.
I think WALL-E's one of the only ones I've seen that actually takes a more positive look in the end. Even though, like, the Earth is a wasteland at the beginning, and, you know, this little robot's all by himself, and he's, you know, leading a miserable life. And then humanity is, like, incredibly sedentary and is not doing well up in space. But by the end of it, I find the ending of that story to be really powerful and uplifting. That, like, the robot finds love and humanity gets to go back down to Earth, and we replenish the Earth. And, like, you know, the end credits are them just, like, rebuilding society and the Earth turning green again. And it's this really lovely, sweet ending. That's one of the only ones I've seen, I think, that actually has a more optimistic, or at least the question of a hopeful, let's say a hopeful ending. That's like, well, where do we go from here? How do we make it better?
Yeah. I mean, massive amounts of fat phobia aside, right?
Yes.
WALL-E has, that hope.
Also, I do just want to go on record as saying I want a TV show set on a generation ship. I think it would be fantastic.
Set on a what?
Set on a generation ship, a ship that travels through space, but it takes generations and generations to get there. And every episode would essentially be a bottle episode, because they would all be set on the ship, and a bottle episode is fairly cheap to shoot. And also, like, we recently had the Crown TV series where they discovered the concept of tell the story of a generation with each season, which I think could also work. And so, like, we have all of the tools to do this. It could be really interesting. But
I agree. I think that would be really, really cool. And you have, like, as the characters get older, you bring in new actors to play. Yeah, I think that would be very, very cool. Yeah.
It reminds me also of Homegoing by Ya Gyasi, which is not a space travel book at all, but it is two, I think they're half-sisters who are in Ghana, who are split up, and one is sold into slavery and the other stays. And then each chapter is a generation all the way to the present day. And it's fascinating to see like how things evolve, because you don't get all of the smooth tie-in and transition. You just get the like this and then this and then this, like a piece of the generation, not the whole generation, smoothly transitioning into the next generation. There is something really compelling about that, because I don't know, maybe it's the way that we have become so disconnected from generational, like we've nuclear familyized everything so that we're not living with multiple generations. At the same time, we're not as connected to those who came before us, right? Like we're not doing the 7 generations thing that is part of many Native American cultures. And so those books and those stories that do that give us this glimpse into thinking about future generations and thinking about what we're doing now, what that does to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm writing it down because we're trying to do a book list this season for folks, and like keeping track of all the books we mentioned.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah, but it's a lot of books. Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of different space travel shows and universes and all of those things. What is your favorite?
As far as shows go, I think probably The Mandalorian. I'm trying to think if I've seen any. Yeah, because I'll be honest, even though I am very much a nerd, I have not seen the different Stargate series. I haven't seen that much Star Trek. I haven't seen a lot of the classic sci-fi TV series. But I did really like, especially like in the first season, the way The Mandalorian brought back the space western aspects and Kurosawa movie aspects of the original Star Wars. And there's something very like rugged about this hardened, lone gunslinger traveling from planet to planet, this lonely existence, and then finding, a cute little child and having a relationship with this child and becoming basically a father. I think that's like a really sweet story. And I think it was really well executed. In fact, seasons 1 and 2, I remember really liking both seasons 1 and 2 of that show.
Yeah. I really liked Mandalorian too. A good one.
How about you?
Yeah.
I am very much a Star Trek person, but I started with the original series. My dad videotaped them back in the day when they were on reruns, and I grew up watching those every winter at night with him. And I am also just now remembering that one of the most hilarious episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a movie called Space Mutiny that is just so terrible, but it is actually set on a Generation ship. I hadn't thought of that before. And it's a hilarious episode of Mystery Science Theater, but also it's a very quirky look at the possibilities of space travel as imagined in the 80s. Very, very 80s.
My favorite show, I love Interstellar. It is one of, if not my favorite movie ever. So I love that. And I love math and science. And that's part of it, right? Like I like when we dig into like, how does the math and science work? But I also really love Star Wars and Doctor Who. And so those are like the other two that are longer term. Yeah. Like I've been watching them longer than Interstellar has existed. And so I keep coming back to them as well for very different reasons, right? Because neither of them are like, here's the math and science of it. Literally, George Lucas doesn't know what a parsec is.
Yeah.
No matter how many times he tries to retcon it to say that he does. But I love those aspects of it. And I love digging into Ahsoka is one of the newest shows, right? And I love the way that it digs into some of that. And there's like travel, but there's also not travel and weird timing. Like it, yeah. I'm just a fan of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically most of the Star Trek I've seen, aside from some of the movies, like both older and newer, was the original series. I think I sat down because I was like, I want to watch the whole thing. And then I started watching and I was like, I heard people say this was cheesy, but I actually think this is really good. And I didn't end up finishing, like I haven't finished it yet. But I don't know, I really liked the original series. So honestly, I'm excited to eventually go back and watch. I don't know if I'll watch every single Star Trek series, but at least finish the original, probably Next Generation, and maybe some of the other ones.
Sure.
I am eventually going to get into Star Trek, and then I will lose months of my life, but I've not yet done that.
Emily's co-host for Horror Nerds at Church and I have a plan to introduce them to Star Trek. So should this podcast or the other podcast or both ever run out of fodder, we will probably start a Star Trek Introducing Emily series.
Or get big enough that somebody else can edit it.
That would be great, yes. I would love that.
That would also help.
Yeah, that's the dream.
What about best and worst sciencing in fiction, whether that's a book or show or movie or RPG and so on? Do you have favorite examples?
So one, I think, example that's really cool is in 2001 A Space Odyssey, they go to the moon in that movie. And then when the astronauts went to the moon a couple of years later, they said, wow, it looks just like 2001 A Space Odyssey. That's how accurate it was. They did such a good job with
Excellent.
Leveraging as much scientific knowledge as they could for when the movie was made, that actual astronauts were like, dang, good job.
Well done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also really like The Martian.
Yeah.
There's a lot that is unrealistic, blah, 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 but like using actual science to like preserve life on Mars until he could get rescued. And
yeah, the book is also very fun. Yeah, I have really enjoyed both the book and the movie of Contact in terms of allowing the science to show forth. And in terms of worst sciencing, goodness, there are so many examples, and only some of them are on Mystery Science Theater 3000, come to think of it. But I'm sure that there are just too many examples to choose from. But in terms of science that wasn't good science, but it got me interested in science, it was actually the Stargate Atlantis TV show that got me fascinated with astrophysics. And so I wound up learning so much about astrophysics, not from the show, but because of the show. That was great.
I think that's what Doctor Who does for me.
Yeah.
There's sciencey explanations that don't really make sense to me because, like, we're making stuff up. But at the same time, that's part of the fascination. The pictures that we get to see every December from the Atlantic of space is, it's part of what draws me in.
I think I'm having trouble thinking of, maybe it's I haven't watched enough terrible sci-fi.
That's real.
One thing that just bugs me, because it is just scientifically very dumb, in my opinion, is not a sci-fi movie, but in the Hobbit trilogy, in the second one, I think it was The Desolation of Smaug is the second one, when they're going down the river. No, it's not in the river. I mean, the river scene was ridiculous from a physics standpoint. It's the third one where Legolas is like on some kind of platform that gets shattered, and he runs up falling pieces of the platform, but they're like small, like step-sized pieces. It's not like he's running and he jumps onto a building that's falling. He just runs up a set of stairs, basically, that are falling. And it's like, guys, Pete, buddy,
no,
like, what are we doing here?
Not how it works.
Come to think of it, there was an episode of Doctor Who that just had me spouting the word, but physics, 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 over and over again at the television screen. Which was, and I don't remember what episode this was, you might remember, Emily, the one that wound up with the 1940s fighter jets in space. Like, the 1940s fighter jet pilots kind of accidentally time traveled to the future to fight these aliens in space, and then were time traveled back. And 1940s fighter jets were not made to actually be solid enough,
airtight,
to survive in space. Like, they would have exploded. So that was not an option. But there is still this scene of fighter jets fighting just outside of Earth's atmosphere, and it was so weird.
I have a vague recollection of that episode, but I don't remember the actual episode. Yeah. Okay, so we would be remiss if we did not dig into anything TTRPG, tabletop role-playing games, because you are the resident GM for Three Black Halflings. So have you navigated space as a GM or as a player? How do you do space in RPGs?
So, yes, I have. The very, very first TTRPG that I ever played was one I've actually run on the show before, called Paradox Perfect. It was made by one of my best friends.
I love those episodes.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it is a time travel TTRPG. And depending on what future template you choose, there can be space travel involved, because each one is kind of based on a classic future archetype, and one of them is space opera, for example. And the very first game that I ever played, we were in space. It was the very first time I'd ever played a TTRPG, and there was a part where, so with that version of the game, because that's like an earlier edition, if you rolled a natural 20, you just got to describe what happens. And so I, having never played a TTRPG, rolling a natural 20 on something, thought, well, rather than have it be the best outcome, I'll have it be what I think is the most interesting outcome. So I narrated that I accidentally smashed through the window of the ship, and a lot of the other characters got sucked out into space. And then we ended up spending the next 2 hours not even dealing with the time travel thing, but finding a way to get half the crew back aboard the ship. It was, it was a blast. I think most of the time, most of the games I've played and run have not really had to deal much with space. Although, and this is actually relevant, I'll go into more detail. I did have sort of like aliens factor in. This will be relevant, and I'll go into more detail later when we start talking about some of the passages from the Bible. But I did have, like, aliens sort of show up as part of a Paradox Perfect game. And that, I guess, theoretically would have involved some space travel for them to have come to Earth. Because their spaceship also factored in as well.
Yeah.
I just remembered, I was also in a series, I don't think it's ever been released. There's a game called Teens in Space. It's part of the Kids on Bikes series. And as part of that, I was the captain of our vessel. We were aboard a sentient ship named Max. That was sort of like this plant ship. It was a sentient organic ship named Max. And I ended up dating the ship. Like when we ended the series, my character was in a relationship with the ship. And
I love that.
Yeah, I was a shrimp man. I was like from a species of shrimp people who were like bred for food. And then the people who created us, who ended up like dying off. So now we're just our own society, but we're still scared to this day that they might return. They're called the Maw, these evil creatures that created us and used to use us as a delicacy. It's called a squillion. So I was a squillion, and most of that series took place on board our ship, traveling from one location to another.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's something about relationship power dynamics there that I just, anyway.
I mean, it reminded me of, so for our Star Wars thing during the strikes, we were doing books instead of movies and shows to not encourage people to cross those picket lines. But we were reading the Star Wars from a certain point of view books. And there's one that takes place on a Wookiee ship.
Ooh.
And it is entirely made of wood. And like as a spaceship, it was really interesting how it like navigated the dynamics of it, because somebody like breaks onto the ship too, and so there's like those extra dynamics of letting you break onto a ship that's wood without like the whole thing just it was really interesting. And so when you were like the ship was alive, I was like like that. Or like, you know, the Millennium Falcon is a trinity of droids. Also is a part of it, but
Do you have any favorite tabletop role-playing games that involve space or space travel?
I would say definitely Paradox Perfect is my favorite one that generally involves it. But Emily, you just reminded me that there is an item in D&D. I guess it's a kind of ship. When they re-released Spelljammer a couple of years ago, one of the items was like this tree. I guess it's not actually an item. It's a monster. It's like it's like a living tree thing that flies through D&D's version of space, like the astral plane.
Yeah, I have two. One is Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is not, it has a different mechanic and is very sapphic. It's delightful because it's like massive amounts of tension. Either you get in a sword fight or you make out.
Yeah.
Like one of those two. So it just tracks a lot. But they have a bunch of different like options if you want to like lead different ones. And so some of them are out in space and like space travel-y ones, which I like. And I backed on Kickstarter Into the Motherlands.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about it. It's had a few ups and downs in the like production process and stuff, but I am super excited about that one in particular. And it's a futuristic sci-fi thing. And the premise is that like colonization is not a thing and never has been. And I love that because we just like so often assume that colonization is required because that's the experience of the world right now. But I love that one. So I'm really excited for that one when it comes out.
Yeah. Isn't Mansa Musa like a major figure in that one as well? Like some sort of spacefaring Mansa Musa?
I think so. I'm not 100% positive. I have been like not as keyed in as we're like waiting because I was like, I just wanted to be here already, and then I'm going to like read all the things.
Yeah. Shout out to Tanya DePass, who's one of the main people over making Into the Motherlands. She's awesome.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I have not actually played a spacefaring TTRPG, but I know two DMs. They are both currently already overwhelmed, and one of them is only experienced in IV, and I also happen to be married to that one, so, you know. But I have found there is a Star Trek RPG system that's out there that I am very fascinated by, but I would have to find like a whole different set of people to play it with. And my husband is also currently in grad school, and I have this podcast, so I don't really have the bandwidth right now. But maybe one day.
That's real. Yeah.
That's totally fair.
All right, so as we jump into our Bible readings for this episode, our first reading is from Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 15 through 28, which we have cheerfully subtitled for you as Ezekiel's UFO. This is the Ezekiel saw the wheel passage.
Yes. I love this one because, I mean, it can be a UFO. It can be a, like, not UFO, but, like, it's a very thorough description of what I interpret as the coolest cyborgish UFO ever. Because it's just, like, the wheels within wheels, and then there are the creatures that are alive, but, like, I don't know if you've seen the memes, Jeremy, but the memes of like angels, biblical angels, right? Where there's just like eyes everywhere. And so I just love that we have a depiction of a spaceship for space travel that just like appears and descends and then moves around. And it goes it's omnidirectional.
Sure.
It's got all the things.
Yeah.
I have always wondered, there is a method of portraying often the solar system, but also like the Earth and the Moon particularly, called an orrery, which is ORREY. And I've always kind of wondered if that concept of how to build a depiction of Earth and the Moon was inspired by this passage of the wheels within wheels, because it is it's not identical, but it is kind of similar in terms of description.
Yeah.
And of course, given how biblical angels are described, including in this very passage, it does make perfect sense that they might get around in a vehicle that is this trippy sounding. That just fits. So
yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. I have no idea. I know what an orrery is, but I've never looked into the history of them. It wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true. But I look at that and I think about how deeply embedded in the Bible people were when they were invented, and I kind of wonder if that was where they came from.
Yeah. I have a couple of things to say about this passage,
Yeah.
one of which is it ties in with the TTRPG that I was going to mention. The first time I ran Paradox Perfect on Three Black Halflings, the plot, without getting into too much into detail, involved aliens coming to Earth. And I think it was, the idea was that like that aspect of the Bible ended up being a prophecy, and aliens came to Earth in spaceships that were very similar to the ones described in the book of Ezekiel. And I can't remember if they did that intentionally because they had somehow picked up like transmissions about the Bible, or if that was just their spaceship design. But during, and if you listen to that episode, towards the end of it, a spaceship that matches this description does show up, and bizarre aliens start to come out of it. We don't engage with it much. I think they just kick them. I think they just kick the wheel and send it away. But it's like they just show up for a minute. And also in the future universe of that world, the ruling class, the ruling system, had created an animatronic facsimile of the throne of God as depicted in the book of Revelation. So there's like a sea of blue, like a sea of glass, and like a throne, and these beings with many faces bowing and saying holy, and like the one on the throne, like you see that throne room, but it's like they discovered that they're all animatronics or put there as part of the government system. It all somehow connects to Guy Fawkes. I don't remember exactly how it all makes sense, but it all sort of kind of made sense. There's two things that I have to say, which is, one, the song Crystal Blue Persuasion. If you've ever heard that, if you listen to Breaking Bad, it's from season 5, episode 8, I think, Gliding Overall. It's actually a Christian song that was written about that vision in the book of Revelation, and how like the crystal blue image persuaded the songwriter to become a Christian. And he tried to write this song to like encourage everybody, like, yeah, love is the answer, and God's gonna bring peace and good and brotherhood. It's gonna be great. But the other thing is there's a Talking Heads song that very specifically references Ezekiel chapter 1 verses 15 through 28 from their album Speaking in Tongues. The song Slippery People references it, which is, Slippery People is seemingly about very charismatic churches and their view of charismatic churches and congregants. So there's like descriptions of people like rolling over and falling on their faces. And the chorus is very like gospel call and response, but they specifically mention turning like a wheel inside a wheel. They mention 7 times 5, which I think it refers to the number of faces and wings. They were living creatures, which of course they're referred to in the passage as living creatures. Watch them come to life right before your eyes. Anyway, if you like Talking Heads and you haven't heard the song Slippery People, I recommend it. It's a good song.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
For what it's worth, Jeremy, I remember listening to that episode of you playing Paradox Perfect. I remember the throne scene coming up, and I internally said to myself, uh-oh. And then you actually knew what you were talking about, and I was so unspeakably grateful. That was great.
Oh, thank you.
Our second reading for this is Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 40, which many people might know about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch who is treasurer to Candace. And this one we have subtitled God as Philip's GPS. So, Philip's GPS, and I would add teleportation device.
Yeah.
So I agree with Kay, but I do think that like there's a GPS Waze kind of in verse 26 where God's like, do this, go this way, and then this way, and then this way, and you'll find the road. But the thing that caught me the most was verses 39 to 40, where it's when they came up out of the water, the Ethiopian having been baptized. The Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more and went on their way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he was passing through the region, he proclaimed the good news to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. And that, like, he just, like, shoop, whether it's, like, wormhole, teleportation, who knows? I haven't ever thought of a good theory on it. I'm curious if there are theories.
I would love God as GPS so much. I have guest preached in so many churches, in so many cornfields, on so many unlabeled roads. That would be lovely.
Yep. Yeah.
That would be truly incredible. I'm trying to think. So there's Enoch, where you have he was not, for God took him. And we have Elijah, who gets yoinked up to heaven in a fiery chariot.
In the chariot.
And then like you have the situation where Jesus was going to get thrown off a cliff, and then he just sort of walks out of the group.
He just like...
Yeah, he just sort of leaves.
And then the ascension.
Yeah, and then the ascension.
Right, like...
Yeah. Absolutely. And he like
Right.
appears to people afterwards, or pre-ascension, but after, yeah. I don't know if there's any other instance in the Bible of just blatant teleportation. And it's weird that it's in some of the most spectacularly bizarre things that occur in the Bible. They're so, like, he was not, for God took him. There's nothing dramatic about it. He's just like, yeah, he's gone now. And it's the same thing here.
Yeah.
So Philip was there, and then now he's over here. And it's like, what?
And then there was a talking donkey, and that just happens sometimes. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Talking donkeys, she-bears that maul children.
At God's command, because that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
It says snatched Philip away, and Philip found himself at Azotus. That's just so... He's just like, well, okay, I guess I'm here now.
Yep. Yeah. I, like, kudos to Philip for, like, the faith of that.
Yeah.
Usually I like the Ethiopian the best in this whole thing, because the Ethiopian is the one that's like, what is to prevent me from being baptized? And Philip's like, oh, I guess nothing. Okay. Right? Like, the Ethiopian is the one pushing the story and pushing the narrative, and also pushing the, like, faith connection and the participation and inclusion. And Philip's just, like, there. Oh, okay. Here you go.
Sure,
We'll do the
why
thing.
not?
Yeah.
Also, the casual angel at the beginning of the passage. I just looked. There's no angel earlier in this chapter. There's just an angel who shows up partway through the chapter, like towards the end of the chapter, and is like, hey, Philip, go over here.
It had said that way.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Now I want a story where a spaceship is piloted by like a deity or demigod, because it adds so many possibilities to the episode plots. I'm thinking maybe something like Xena in space with deities and demigods, probably similar maturity levels, which is to say not much at all. You could have so much fun with that.
Absolutely.
I mean, as of recording this, we just recorded and released our Moana movie commentary for Patreon. And so now when you said that, Kay, I was like, so Maui, not only having a hug, like in space.
That would be sick.
Excellent.
They're making a second Moana, I think, but I don't think they're going to do it in space.
Probably not.
Probably smart, responsible, but yeah.
That would be pretty awesome if they did.
That's like Moana 18.
Yeah. Yes, Moana 18. That'd be a little bit in the future, yeah. And now for our Muppets moment. So, Jeremy, which Muppet do you most want to play in D&D, and what class would they be?
So, I think the Muppet voice I like the most is Sam Eagle. However, I think the Muppet that most obviously translates to a specific class in D&D, for me, is Animal, who is clearly a barbarian. Clearly having the time of his life. Yeah, is absolutely a barbarian. He's having the time of his life. I would love for that. That would just be a fun thing to play. You're just there. You don't really say anything except repeat what other people say. And you just yell it, and then you hit stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honorable mention goes to Gonzo, who would be fun to play as like a magician. Because you know how like Gonzo is always trying to be like some sort of magic guy? I think that would be a fun one as well.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was thinking about Gonzo too, because I just like
you
Gonzo.
You often are thinking about Gonzo. That's fair.
It's true. It's true. Gonzo is so non-binary. It's just the vibes.
Isn't he canonically a whatever? Isn't that what like they call him usually?
I don't remember. Probably.
I know in one of the movies they're like, "I'm a rat." Rizzo's like, "I'm a rat," and he's like, "Ah, whatever." And I think I've heard him say that a few times, that he just refers to himself as a whatever.
Yeah. I think he also would work really well as a bard, particularly thinking about A Muppet's Christmas Carol, right, where he's Charles Dickens, and so he's telling the story and doing all that.
Especially with like the and it works with the magic stuff like prestidigitation and stuff like that. Like bards would get all of that. Yeah.
I have to admit, I kind of cheated because I'm the one who came up with this question, and also I have a plan. We are currently playing through a campaign, so I have a character already, but I want my next character to be based on the Swedish Chef. Like, I'm thinking like the Swedish Chef's granddaughter or something. And I'm trying to decide about her class right now, because the logical side of my brain says that she should be an alchemist, right? Because she combines different things, and that's how her magic would work. And alchemists are complicated to play, but I would like to figure that out. That would be fun. But there's another side of me that's saying, but what if she was a warlock and her patron was like the queen of the summer court who wanted her to go out and find new recipes?
Ooh.
And the one thing I absolutely know for sure is that I cannot under any circumstances combine those two, because both warlock and alchemist are so horribly complicated. I would never actually play anything. I would spend all my time trying to make decisions. And so like I can't combine them. I have to pick one or something else, but I really think that one of those two works best. So I'm undecided on that. But I love the idea of bork, bork, bork as a war cry. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and you'd have to have the chef feet for sure. You'd have to take the chef feet no matter what.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious about a rogue. I feel like I am blanking on Muppets, but there is a rogue in the Muppets. But
I have a list of Muppets here.
Oh, nice. I have a list of D&D classes here.
Oh, nice. I always think of Rizzo as kind of a rogue.
Oh,
yeah, that is true.
That would work. Yeah.
Throughout the Christmas Carol movie, he does go through and steal a whole bunch of cookies from people. I can't really blame him for that.
Statler and Waldorf would be bards because of vicious mockery. That's all they use. That's all they
Absolutely.
Vicious mockery.
Yeah.
Maybe that irrepressible dance occasionally when they get bored.
Mm-hmm. I think Miss Piggy would have levels of barbarian, but I think she'd be that multi-classed maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or she could be a monk with her, karate and all.
Very true.
That's true. She could do both, barbarian and monk.
Yeah.
I mean, the Electric Mayhem Band, obviously, you'd like bardic.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Except for Animal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Except for Animal. Right. I think Animal would have one level of bard.
Sure. To play the drums.
Just enough.
Yeah.
To play the
just
drums
for the proficiencies. Specifically for the proficiency in performance. That would be it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Now I really want to play Muppets D&D.
Actually, I Googled it a while back, and people have come up with Muppets as a species to play in D&D. They have come up with actual numbers that you can use, and the mechanics of how playing a character made out of cloth and felt would work, as opposed to playing one made out of skin and bone and such. So there are a few different systems out
Pathfinder.
there. Maybe, sure.
Pathfinder.
The ones I've seen were for 5e, but yeah.
Oh yeah, but Pathfinder has a race or has an ancestry. I think they're called ancestries in Pathfinder. That is you're an artificial, you're like a stuffed animal or an artificial person. It actually one of their
that's amazing.
On one of their lists. Yeah, you can be so you could literally play a Muppet.
Excellent.
I now want to play Pathfinder. I need to find. I have long been without a D&D group, so now seems like the time to get back into it.
Sure.
I'm trying to look up what it was called. It's called the Stufflin. I think it's called the Stufflin.
Oh, that's adorable.
The Stufflin. All right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jeremy, any other thoughts on life, the universe, and everything?
Oh boy. I just want to say how cool I think your show is. I think this is a really, really cool. It is, as somebody who grew up in the church, but then went to 2 secular universities, one of which was a drama school, which I don't know. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but the arts and religion often do not get along very well these days, and have not for quite a while, unfortunately. Especially when it comes to Christianity, and then going into TTRPGs, and the TTRPG industry is also usually not all that friendly to religion, and especially when it comes to Christianity. So it's really nice and refreshing to meet some fellow nerds who are religious, and not just religious, but have a different understanding of it than I was raised with, because my understanding of religion has really shifted, especially in the last 10, 15 years. So it's really cool to see wow, I would love to. I've never been to a church with a queer pastor, but I would love to, or even a feminist pastor, but I would love to be able to do that and see the Bible and Christian doctrine from that perspective instead. I think that's really, really cool. And I love that you're talking about nerd stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great having you too.
Absolutely.
It's fun. We just shifted this season to a different format, and I really like the shift that we've done, but it has given so much more space to nerd out, especially about the things that we're extra special interest on. Yeah. So this has been a fun way of doing that and still connecting it to faith, that it still makes those connections.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a blast.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining us to our listeners. Theme music was by Rachel Meyer-Laughlin, Muppets music was by Brenda Boss, and seasonal artwork was by Pace Warfield. Catch us next time when we'll dive into the space programs and NASA with special guest Reverend Kristen Rice. This podcast has been produced by us, Kay Rohloff and Emily Ewing. For more fun, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Blue Sky at Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut episodes, merch discounts, movie commentaries, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. Starting at just $5 per month, it is much cheaper than any space travel in science fiction, fantasy, or reality that you might try.
Absolutely. Also, let us know on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Twitter, which Muppet would you like to play in D&D and what class would they be?
As the ancient Christians said,
Pax
Pax
Vobiscum.
Vobiscum.